Check, check. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If you could please proceed into Hannaford Hall, our event will begin shortly. Feel free to bring your refreshments into the hall. Once again, if you could step into Hannaford Hall, our event will begin shortly. Thank you.
Yes. Yep. I know. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We're going to try and kick off as soon as we can, just out of respect out of your time. So we'll be up and running here in just a couple minutes. We'll just get a couple last people out of the lobby, and we'll be off and running. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is John Jennings. I'm the city manager in Portland. I want to thank all of you for taking time on a Saturday morning and afternoon to join us. City staff is eager to present our findings as it relates to the Homeless Services Center and give you a little bit of history as to how we got here. We certainly understand that this is an emotional topic. There are good people who disagree with our findings, and we certainly understand that. And so today, we simply want to have a presentation and then questions and answers afterwards in our breakout sessions. I also want to welcome the City Council. We have Councilors Mavadonis, Dusan, Batson, Ray, Pius Ali, and Mayor Strimling. I believe Councilor Costa is here as well. I also want to thank city staff. Our city staff, I'm obviously biased, but our city staff is the best, certainly the most professional group of people I've ever had the opportunity to work with. So the city staff who's pulled all of this material together and who have worked tirelessly to get us here this morning. So with that, I'd like to introduce Assistant City Manager Mike Soschek to lead off the presentation.
Thanks, John. All right, well, good morning. I'll piggyback on John's comments for just a second, just to say thank you for coming in. There's been a lot of feedback back and forth, a lot of great questions, a lot of concerns out there in the community, and we want to spend the next couple hours trying to work through some of those. The first portion of today will be a presentation really focused on those big heavy hitter topics that we've heard repeatedly from the community, residents, various neighborhood associations. So we want to address some of those things right up front load that for you. And then we're going to break out into smaller groups. And the reason for the smaller groups is we're still going to talk about those heavy hitter topics. I'll be involved in a safety and security conversation. Rob will be talking about model. John will be out there. We'll have about 9 different breakouts. But what we're trying to do is get away from a few hundred people in a room, and we're trying to figure out who's who. We want to have a conversation with people. And this particular venue allows us to do that. So we'll have 9 different breakout sessions, and we'll kind of rotate around to answer questions directly, face-to-face, with anything that you'd like to cover. And if we can't answer those questions today, we certainly can try to get those for you. So as John mentioned, myself, John, and Rob Parrott will be the primary presenters for this morning's portion. And out of respect for your time, we are going to try and crank through because there's such a lot of information here. So what today's actually going to look like, the presentation part is about 45, 50 minutes worth of PowerPoint stuff. I apologize for that. But again, we think it's important to get what information we have out there to you. I should note that we are videotaping this session so we can put it up on the web later. It's a Saturday, 11 to 1. We want to make sure that as many people get this information as possible and something that will live on the website as the process continues. So all that will be out there. And then I would envision about a 5-minute break as we move to different locations here in the building. And as you come through the front door there, there's a stairwell to your right. The first floor breakout sessions are right there. There's just 2 of them. And that's 50 people per. And if you go up to the second floor, right at the top of the stairs, and we'll have some city staff that can help guide you. We go to the top of the stairs. All of the rooms are on the right-hand side. All of them have flyers on the outside about what particular topic's going to be in that session. So we would take 5 minutes, go to the various venues, talk for 20 minutes or so, break out, go to the next model, and rotate through. We learned that in the comprehensive plan process. Jeff Levine is here, and it's just to get an opportunity to talk to people rather than talk at people in an auditorium kind of a setting. So we hope that this works out. The process will continue, and we will touch on the timeline kind of stuff, other opportunities to ask questions and give feedback. All of that stuff is going to continue over the months to come. So the only difficult part with the presentation side of the house, we're not taking any questions in here because we want to, again, have that opportunity to move into that smaller setting. And that will include, when we break out, we'll be heading the room. So if you have a question for the aisleway or the lobby, try to hold it for a room so everybody can kind of hear that. So what are those breakout sessions actually going to be? So I'll be talking about safety and security in 109. Chief Malik will be in 110. It's about 100 spaces, just back to back with one of those accordion dividers in place. Regional services, Dave McLean. Dave's our social services director, super guy, professional, knows his stuff. He'll be upstairs. Rob will be talking about the model in room 213. Full service city with John. So that's talking with the city manager about the location, selection process, guidance, other hopes and dreams stuff for the city of Portland overall. We have our planning director, Jeff Levine, to talk about zoning, land use and transportation at 215. Cullen Ryan, super guy, saw Cullen come in earlier, Executive Director of Community Housing of Maine. Norm Mays from Shalom, Norm's here, highly professional guy. Meredith Pesh from Amistad, great team to talk about housing services in the community. So what else is going on out there? What do we have access to? And they've all been in the game for decades. So we appreciate them coming in. And our own Health and Human Services Director, Dawn Stiles, talking about the face of homelessness in room 217. That's kind of getting beneath the numbers a little bit, talking about people's existence in their life day to day. So we think that a lot of these sessions will help us break down those big topics into something that's a little bit more manageable, we hope. So talking about, so who do we serve? As our residents, as our people, our constituents, our clients, whatever you'd like to call yourselves. The state of Maine, as many people know, it's about 1.3 million people. That means we're a large state geographically, but we've got a really tight, small population overall. And when you throw in Google the metro area of Portland, if you will, the greater Portland area, if you talk about southern Maine, it's about 500,000 or so folks that live in our general area. So while the city of Portland has about 66,000 folks based on a census for 2010, we know tens and tens of thousands of people come into the city every day to do business and go to school and all those other things that we enjoy about our community. And for Portland, in the state of Maine, and for a certain extent in the region, we know that we're an economic driver for the state of Maine. We also know that we're a cultural driver in the state of Maine, diversity driver. We also know we're a social service regional hub. There's no question about that, and we know that. And in many respects, the hub component of being in Portland is a positive thing for us in the sense that we have services and things of that nature that we have access to that other people in a more rural location may not. But there are also things that we know that can be troubling for us as our residents and trying to figure out where that line is. We're trying to serve everybody at the same time. And I think the city manager is doing a great job having that conversation with the state and others as we're talking about residents that live here and who are we serving and everything else along the line. But we'll dig into that a little bit more as we go. So today, who do we serve? Clients, right? When we're talking about this particular issue, we're talking about 1,833 unduplicated clients. Now, Rob would say over a year, that's over 1,800 new people that we deal with in the Oxford Street Shelter. So people are rotating through that facility on a regular basis with about an average of 200 in there a night. And as an example, I think last night, based on their shift log, had about 179 overall. But again, averaging 200, which is not a surprise that a location we're ultimately trying to cover 200 of those clients a night. Talk about how long they stay with us at any given time. You can look at, 28% stay 1 to 3 nights, right? They're in and they're out. And there's a primary reason for that. They're in and they're out. That's because our housing navigators, our team is working to get them out as fast as possible and get them on their way. 48% stay 4 to 60 nights. 84% stay 1 to 90 nights. And something I don't think that people are overly aware of, which is a pretty powerful stat from my perspective, is that in the last year, so we're talking August 17 to August 18, that our housing team placed 257 people in housing. Right? That's an amazing, amazing job that they do. They take pride as housing navigators and the rest of the team. We'll talk about the comprehensive approach to ending homelessness a little later. But 187 men, 70 women, and 14 veterans overall that are in that mix. And I break out veterans specifically because there's a lot of funding streams and things that may deal specifically with veterans and housing, and we should obviously take care of veterans whenever humanly possible. But 257 folks that our team housed in that time frame. This isn't just a conversation about emergency temporary housing placement for crisis situations. There is an overall plan that we'll talk about a little later. So how did we get here? You talk about root causes of homelessness. This is a national approach, right? And the national approach to this, again, how we got here also has a direct impact on us locally because they're the exact same factors in the sense of lack of affordable housing. There's a lot of stories out there about the lack of affordable housing. And that's not a Portland problem, it's not a Maine problem, it's a national problem for sure. And I think the city of Portland's trying to address this through a lot of different ways. And we have partnered successfully with a lot of folks on Housing First initiatives. Avesta's got a great program with multiple housing platforms. Chum, as I mentioned earlier, with Cullen's team, and Shalom, and the list goes on and on and on about the folks in the programs that we try to do to address affordable housing. Untreated behavioral health issues. I could jump on a big old soapbox up here and talk to you the rest of the day about that. But when we talk about behavioral health issues, talk about mental health and substance use disorders, I often say, if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. The systems that are based around behavioral health issues are not broken, they are shattered. They are shattered in the state of Maine. And we lack resources at all levels to deal with those kind of problems. And I would say specifically for treatment, for prevention, everything across the board, we are lacking in that realm. I do think that we have programs locally that the city of Portland's involved with, whether it's our public health unit, a nationally recognized best practice team at the police department and the work that they do, and a lot of partners out there that do great work with this population. But are we doing enough? The answer is no, we are not doing enough. And that does lead to homelessness for a lot of people. Again, not just in the city of Portland, but anywhere you go. That is one of those key drivers for homelessness. Unemployment and poverty. I could say that, recent stats would say unemployment in the city of Portland is less than 3%, right? That's good news to a certain extent, unless you're trying to build a business, and we're always working on bringing in some more workers, folks that can help us build businesses and build the economy locally. But the population that we're working with in this particular conversation, because of some of those behavioral health issues, may be much more difficult to place in an employment setting. Doesn't mean we quit, that means we work hard to get them jobs. And there was a great story in the Boston Globe today about our opportunity crew and the work that they're doing with people that want to work. These are folks that are panhandling on a median strip that are approached by our city staff saying, hey, how about coming out and beautifying the city as an example? And there's great stories, one after another, about folks that are out there and coming to the table and doing great work for us in that kind of a setting. So again, local factors. So today we're talking about homeless services centers and our approach to that kind of service here in the city of Portland. So while we do have that component of behavioral health issues and affordable housing and everything else, what brings us here today is the model that we've used for decades is completely ineffective. And we fully understand that. And we have a city manager that's willing to own that fact and then to try to do something about it, which we have not had in the past. So the current shelter model, it's an inefficient use of space. And to say the least, that's 3 levels, essentially a duplex that's put together. So you have, we're sleeping a few folks over here and all over the place. There's no food services. We lack the potential for laundry on site. And the list goes on and on and on about that current location. But then you have the Bayside model itself, right? So you have the shelter, which is one piece of that overall neighborhood. And that's an ineffective approach in that you have a lot of service providers that are spread all over that particular neighborhood, and it makes it very difficult to serve anybody adequately. So when we own those 2 facts, and then we look at capacity internally, so that's capacity from a city policy. Those are other things that we're working on the state with about residency requirements. And there'll be some great conversations today, I'm sure, questions about, so why is it a third, and a third? And what are we doing if there's a third of people from Portland and a third of people from the state of Maine and a third of people from wherever? Why are we serving all these people? Well, we're more than happy to have that conversation with you. I know the city council is as well. So those guidelines are out there, and a lot of you are incredibly well-versed in this topic, so you've probably seen this slide before, but this is, again, kind of digging into the current model a little bit, and these are legit mats that people are sleeping on day to day at the current Oxford Street shelter. Poorly configured. Just this last year, we've put in outdoor bathroom facilities, outdoor storage facilities, that had been talked about for well over a decade that I've been involved in those conversations are now at that location because those were problems that were impacting the clients that are staying there and ultimately impacting everybody in that neighborhood and folks around the city. So the current design is just completely inadequate to actually get the work done at that particular location. To provide a little bit of context, a little bit of background, before we really start, again, digging into individual topics, this conversation's been happening for a long time, and the sheltering services that we provided has been going on for a long time. So Oxford Street's actually been in place since '89 and expanded in '95. So that's a long time we've been helping folks in our communities. Expanding those services in '04 and '13, that's overflow locations and realizing we didn't have enough space to deal with people that were in the midst of a crisis. This 2015, I'm going to talk about long-term stayers a little bit more. This is an incredibly important and powerful initiative that's been in place for a few years now. The definition of a long-term stayer is somebody who spent 180 nights back-to-back in the shelter or 180 nights in the shelter system throughout a calendar year. So there's a large section of people that were in that world, caught in that revolving door of homelessness. And they've done some incredible work to get some of those folks housed, and I'll talk about some stats on that in a second. And then you have really the latest version of the Health and Human Services Public Safety Task Force work on sheltering. And that really kicked off in 16, 17, and we got some firm guidance on where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do. So we started moving forward, but again, talking about the journey, there's some conversation in the community like this just started, when in fact it's been ongoing for many, many, many years. And the process continues, obviously, that's why we're here today. But John actually was a tri-chair of this task force to end homelessness back in 2011. The mandate came out in 11 from the council to start a task force, and then it was actually stood up in 2012. I was an interim police chief at that time. I also served on that committee, and there was a lot of work that was had for months and months before a report came out. And that really talked about retooling the emergency shelter system as is, rapid rehousing, increasing case management. A lot of those things have occurred or are occurring, right? An ongoing process. So a lot of that stuff happened. Long-term stayer initiative, this is where I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. So if you talk about that group, right, 180 days back to back, truth be told, before the long-term stayer initiative started, the city was incredibly focused on folks that had just entered the shelter system. We're trying to get people in that first week and get them out immediately before they got stuck in that rut as well. And that initiative, that work still happens with our housing navigators. But we also looked for bang for the buck and said, you know, there's a long-term stayer that's been here for 3,000 nights. What are we doing about that person? And is that person stuck in this system? Are they in crisis? What can we do to try to move them out? And that's where this long-term stayer initiative came up. And you can naturally sit here as a layperson and go, so I'm guessing that somebody who's been in the shelter system for 3,000 nights may need some more supports, right? Wraparound services or something like that to successfully make that transition. We can get them into housing, but can they stay in housing? Well, the answer is yes, they can stay in housing. 95.1% success rate. That means once this team gets folks housed, that they stay housed. They're not back in that shelter system. So that's a big deal, and that's something, again, that's incredibly important. And so if you look at 222 of those long-term stayers have been successfully housed since the initiation of that program a few years ago, that's, again, pretty powerful numbers. And I want to sing some of those praises for the people that are here that do that work, because they certainly deserve that. Health and Human Services, again, that last version with the committee that got together. A lot of you attended a lot of those public sessions. State of Maine room were the ones that I remember, and then on the council chambers we were looking at designs. A lot of conversation had about this just a couple years ago. Updated some land use code. We talked about key traits for new shelters. That kind of kicked off members from that group, as well as members of our staff, road tripping and doing some best practice work. But more importantly for today's conversation, out of that committee came some basic guidelines from the council. And said if we're looking for a new location for a service center, we want to make sure that it's in a visible location and it has access to transportation. And I want to be very upfront, and I want to just talk about the visible location part for a second. Visible location does not mean it's a good, feel-good initiative, like, oh, we want to make sure we're not hiding anybody so they don't feel bad about themselves, right? That's a piece of it. But the more important piece about not hiding the homeless means that you're trying to plug them in to communities. You're trying to get them involved with neighborhoods. You're trying to put them into day-to-day life, which is a big component from a social service perspective of being successful and getting people out of that homelessness plight, that crisis that they're in. And again, on that long-term path to health and wellness is something that we talk about. The access to transportation stuff, we're not sticking them at the end of anywhere. They have to have access to the community. They have to have access to other services. Those kind of things are incredibly important when we're trying to select a new location for a service center. Other things that came out of that involve some work that Rob's going to talk about now around best practices and things of that nature. So Rob, thank you very much, sir.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? All right. So my name is Rob Parrott. I'm the director of the Oxford Street Shelter here in Portland. I do see a lot of familiar faces, which is great. And every time I get in front of a group, number one, I'm not going to walk around nearly as much as Mike, so it'll be much easier to follow me on stage. But I really do want to just start my remarks by saying how proud I am to work for a municipality that is taking this on under John and the council's leadership to do something better for our most vulnerable neighbors. As somebody who is in the neighborhood, in the shelter, on the front lines, 50 whatever hours a week that I'm down there, I can tell you right now, unequivocally, that the model that is currently operating is not tenable. It's not. And it makes me feel really good that, as Mike alluded to earlier, there are some great people who have just very differing opinions on this, but everyone agrees that something has to change, and I'm not hearing a lot of vitriol towards homeless folks or blaming or anything like that. That makes me feel very, very proud to work in a municipality that embraces their most vulnerable neighbors like that. So, discourse is really good and really important, and we want to be as transparent and try to educate as many people as we can, because trust me, I hear all the rumors, all the stuff that goes on about what we're planning and that sort of thing. And I'd just like to start off with those remarks. So, national best practices. Something we talk about a lot. The world of providing shelter services is pretty small compared to how big the problem is nationally. And there is a very dedicated group of professional people here in Maine and around the country that operate emergency shelters. And there's a couple very important groups that are sort of policy setters at the national level that really collate a lot of information and get it out to shelter providers. And that's the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and also the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. And they give some very, very, very clear guidelines on what effective emergency shelters should be, because you guys might not know it, but there are a huge spectrum of different shelter models. Even here in the city of Portland, there are various shelter models, but what we're being told by the national experts, and also what statistics will bear out, is that these are the effective strategies. You should promote dignity and respect. You should divert people from homeless service system whenever possible so they don't enter. Adopt a housing first approach and create a low barrier access to emergency shelter. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. That's my soapbox, low barrier shelters. Use emergency shelter stays as a platform for housing and not warehousing folks. So, to promote dignity and respect, right now, what we're doing is the bizarro version of promoting dignity and respect. I cannot think of a less respectful existence for someone who is forced to check into our building at night. You stand in a line because there's no good welcome area. You check into the shelter. You're told by our very caring, excellent staff where you're sleeping for the night. You're given a blanket, you're given a sheet, and you're assigned to a mat, whether that's in our building or at our overflow shelter that we operate every night down at Preble Street. And you sleep in that mat 6 inches on either side from someone who you probably don't know. That's not great. It is not respectful. In the morning, you get up after a rough night's sleep. People coming, people going. Shelter staff are reversing overdoses. They're doing perimeter checks. They're checking on everyone's safety. Not a great way to get a night's sleep. You have to walk down to Preble Street to get food, and you have to face an open-air market of some predatory and unsafe behaviors a lot of folks really don't want to participate in. You come back to the shelter, hang out for a few hours. That's awesome. You want to get lunch? You got to traverse that same road that everyone who lives in Bayside or has been through there sees. Traverse that again, do the same thing at dinner. You do that every single day. Doesn't leave you a lot of time to work on things like employment, your physical health care, your housing. And that's where our team of amazing navigators and our service provider professionals come in and assist folks. And that goes not just for people who are currently in the shelter, but people who have recently left homelessness. Throughout this process, I've been chatting with a lot of folks who have recently exited the shelter system, and I'm going to put my friend Meredith Pesh on the spot, and she runs a house for women who have recently left the shelter and who are in sobriety. They do a wonderful job, and I've been doing some focus groups with those ladies about what they think, our model should look like, what they like about it, what they don't. They're not bashful about telling me that, which is awesome. But the most powerful, powerful thing that has stuck with me through this whole process is one woman who I've known for about a decade told me it was easier to detox off of her substance of choice than it was to detox from the neighborhood. And that is very, very, very powerful, because you have folks who might leave homelessness, but they got to feed the beast. They got to come down. They're still struggling with sobriety. So we have people that are housed that are still sucked into this conglomerate of services, all well-meaning people, but it just puts people in a very condensed and packed situation. And I think that just touches me in a very personal way, because she was able to quantify something I was not able to do for years, and she said it like that. So, diverting people from homeless services system whenever possible. We do a good job of that now. So for everyone who comes into the shelter, we do an intake, a very thorough screening process, and if we can find a place for you to go that night, our staff will drive you there. It is much cheaper to have 2 staff people drive someone. Oh, my wife kicked me out for the night because I went on a bender. Oh, well, we're going to drive you back to your house and get you back in, or I locked myself out of my apartment because I'm newly housed and I forgot my keys or locked myself out because I've been on the streets for 20 years. So we do a lot of that. We also do family reunification and transportation too, because we see a phenomenon where people come to Maine, get stuck here because they see a reality show or something. They think they're going to be a lobster fisherman, and they come here and they say, uh-oh, I'm from Nevada. The folks down in the Old Port weren't really looking to put me on for help, catching wicked tuna or whatever it is. They see that happens way more than you guys would think, and that's the circumstantially homeless folks that Mike was talking about. We'll help them with transportation rather than enter them into our shelter system. Also, too, the state of Maine is entering into this phenomenal new system called coordinated entry, where it's a HUD requirement for those shelters, and there are about 40, Leah, 40, 41? 37, that's close. Federally funded emergency shelters throughout the state of Maine that all have to participate in a coordinated entry system where we work to keep people in their communities because we're doing a really poor job about that for years and years. And there's a whole laundry list of stuff. And I'm happy to come and talk to anybody individually or in the breakout sessions to get into the minutia of that. I'm trying really hard to not use acronyms or go into the really boring world of HUD speak and all that stuff. So, adopting a housing-first approach, create a low-barrier access to emergency shelter. I feel very confident that we are checking those boxes in an emphatic way right now. So housing first, show of hands, how many people have an understanding of what housing first means? Outstanding. How many of you know that there are multiple versions of the housing first model? Bill, you don't count. You know this stuff. So there's 2 different styles of housing first that you can do. There's the amazing models that they do at Preble Street, Florence House, Houston Commons, not Joe Chrysler, but they're housing first projects. That's brick and mortar housing first, where you take folks, You don't ask them to get sober. You don't ask them to seek treatment. You don't ask them to get employment. Move them right to an apartment with 24-hour built-in supports. That's rad. That's awesome. We love that. There's only 3 of those buildings in Portland. We got way more homeless folks than that. So what we do is we, at the Oxford Street Shelter and amongst our community partners, have embraced the scattered site housing first approach. We apply the same principles of housing first around not asking people to get sober, find employment, any of that stuff. We house them using vouchers, whether it be Shelter Plus Care, Section 8, different veterans vouchers, trying to keep it generalized for folks. Move them into an apartment and then wrap services around them. And we actually have 2 full-time staff people at the shelter. That's their whole job, is just keeping people in shelter, housing retention. So I think we do a tremendous job around that. So, low barrier shelter. People show their hands, understanding what low barrier shelter means. Does everyone think all shelters in Maine are low barrier? No, there's like 3 of them. So I would say that it's a statewide issue that we need more low barrier shelters, not just here in Portland, but around the state. Because what ends up happening is folks, what I like to call is homeless plinko. You start up in northern Maine, and you have a substance use issue or untreated mental health or whatever, you bounce from shelter to shelter to shelter to shelter, and you'll stick in Bangor because they have a low barrier shelter. They do a wonderful job at the Hope House up there. Or they miss Bangor and they plinko their way down to Portland, and they definitely catch here because we don't turn folks away. And then we have to house them. So if we had more low barrier shelter, it would be exponentially better for our community and our state. It's also really important to know, I get asked all the time, why do you let people in who are under the influence, who are, struggling with mental health issues, whatever? And I respond by saying every person who's in a shelter is not camping out, is not in someone's yard, is not unsafe, which is really what this is all about, is keeping our most vulnerable neighbors safe. So if all shelters were low barrier, we would be in a much, much better space. Use emergency shelter stays as a platform for housing. We absolutely do that. That is national best practice. We start the housing conversation the night you come into shelter, like Mike talked about. It's on our intake. We develop a housing plan pretty much right away for every single person who comes into shelter. Some people just need a point in the right direction. Some people are going to need daily meetings with their navigators to move out. So we do a good job in that and want to continue to do that. Okay. All right, so best practices for scattered sites. So people forget that in Portland, we hear a lot about, you guys should build a scattered site model. We are one piece of the shelter puzzle in Portland that we actually have scattered shelters throughout our city. We have the Joe Chrysler Teen Shelter, which is in Bayside. Through these doors, which is a domestic violence provider, we're not going to name their location for safety purposes. Milestone, which is on India Street, that's our wet shelter in our community. City of Portland Family Shelter, Florence House, which is a women's shelter, and Amistad is a day shelter over in the West End. All do a great job. So, shelters that we've explored and researched. So we've had pretty substantial conversations or visited each of these facilities. I want to be really clear that any facility that's on this list is not one that we're looking to exactly replicate and put somewhere. I think good planning and good program building, you can pick and choose and see what works and what doesn't at each and every single one of these facilities. And I think our model encapsulates the best of all of these, whether it's Pine Street in a very urban, high-density populated area, low barrier shelter in Boston, Caspar in Cambridge, again, our friends up in Bangor at the Hope House, Father Bill's places in Quincy, we went and toured that a couple of years ago, and a lot of talk about the POV, the Poverello Center out in Missoula, Montana. I've talked pretty extensively with the executive director out there, and I think that there are things that they do out there that we like, but I think more importantly, it's a really great opportunity for us to learn about some of the stuff that maybe didn't work or stuff that they want to do but can't because of financial limitations or staffing shortages or whatever that happened out there in Montana. And one of the things that I think is very different from our shelter system as opposed to a nonprofit is that as a municipality, we have a lot more resources, energy, and ability to make sure that things don't fall by the wayside, like being open 24 hours or having all the programming that we need. So, one site versus scattered site logistics for scattered sites, very, very challenging for staff and clients. So coordinating guest transportation amongst 5 different sites every single night would be very, very difficult. Right now, we have a scattered site system in Portland, and every single night, every one of those shelters is full, and we are the overflow. So I would worry a lot about planning overflows for 5 different sites in a scattered site model. And really, also, our service providers, because we got tons of them who are willing to come and partner with us at the new site, they don't have unlimited staff. They can't come out and provide those extensive services at 5 different locations. They can do it to one. They can get people out there for several hours a week or every single day, whatever, but they couldn't do it, and that's the feedback we're getting from folks. They really couldn't provide those great services at lots of different sites. So cost, there's another slide about this, but we'll show that in a minute. Staffing, extremely expensive across sites because we want every site to meet best practice, right? So if every site is open 24 hours, has meals, security, housing navigators, all that good stuff, it's going to be extremely, extremely costly. Food costs, the preparation, delivery, storage would be 20% higher by our guesstimations. Operational costs. So I'm going to go delve into our funding real quick. So we get paid through our Maine housing grants based on a percentage of the overall homeless population we provide services to throughout the entire state. That doesn't change whether we're spread out throughout 5 different sites or 1. So we would get the same reimbursement, but have like 5 times the overhead, which is very, very difficult. And obviously site acquisition costs, and renovations, that sort of thing. So annual operating costs. And this is all backed up in the materials that are online. So hopefully you guys look at that stuff. Our current shelter operates about a $3.8 million budget, and that's being open 24 hours, our storage, all that stuff. Our new site, looking at about 4.7. The increase in that is food services. Food's super expensive. Scattered sites, we figure 5 sites, about $10.2 million. Again, most of that is staffing. In an all-service center model, you guys have seen this slide before, but we really feel very strongly that the model that we're building and incorporating is going to have all this stuff, and it's going to be much, much better for our community. So thank you. I'm going to pass it on to John. Sorry, I just rushed through it, but I can talk about this stuff all day. So I'm going to introduce City Manager John Jennings. Thanks. Yep.
Thank you, Rob. Obviously, you can tell from Rob's presentation he's quite passionate, as is all the folks who work for him and work with him. So thank you very much to all of you who are in the crowd tonight or this afternoon who work for the city and who do amazing work for our most vulnerable residents. So I want to talk a little bit about location. I know we're running short on time, but I think this is one of those topics that the vast majority of people are here to want to delve into. I certainly ask for you to come to the breakout session that I'm hosting if you want to talk in greater detail. So first of all, anyone knows, in the city of Portland, it is very difficult to find available land. It's either very costly or it's simply not available. As we started the process of looking for a new shelter location. We began our process looking at the peninsula. And as all of you know, the current location is in Bayside, East Bayside, on Oxford Street. What we began to do then is look at other possible locations on Munjoy Hill, the West End, West, and East Bayside. Some years ago, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, the previous HHS committee looked at the possibility of a location on Marginal Way near the U-Haul business. But unfortunately, that property is no longer available for us to have considered in this process. The next, and let me go to specifically our site analysis, which is really a macro look of how we factored in all of the various locations in the city. Presumpscot Street. We spent a lot of time looking at Presumpscot. Obviously, Presumpscot is a very long street, so the closer you get to Washington, the better the transportation and certainly site visibility. As you progress even further out, it's much more difficult, and certainly the transportation is limited. I believe it's just the metro from Falmouth, comes down Presumpscot, and that's the way, would be the limited transportation opportunities. So that did not score. That scored relatively fine, but not certainly where we ended up. Bishop Street. Bishop Street is an area around where the, not Florence, Houston Commons, sorry. Houston Commons is located. Merle's Corner, obviously a lot of challenging issues in Merle's Corner in terms of transportation and navigation. So we were concerned about that. We do not own property on Bishop Street. We also found that it was very limited to none that we could identify of any available property that would be available. Washington Avenue and Canco Road was a very interesting concept. I engaged with members of the First Baptist Church who were very positive in wanting to work with us to try to solve the issues of homelessness. And they have a lot of land behind the church, right at the corner of Canco and Washington. There's a lot of land. Now, some of it is wet, so there were challenges in terms of the site. But ultimately, we decided that that was a location that probably was not going to work, even though the church was very supportive of what we were trying to do. County Way. So County Way is actually out by where the jail, Okay, well, we can certainly talk about that in the breakout session. Trying to be respectful. The Bishop Street location, I just mentioned that in the Washington Street location, we don't own the property. And so, again, from an expense standpoint, we simply we don't have available property there. County Way, as I was mentioning. County Way is the property out by the jail. And we own a very small sliver of property there as the city. There is other property that's owned by the state and other property that's owned by the county. We have looked at this property. Unfortunately, there is a sizable amount of contamination on this property. And so we felt as though that prohibited us from going forward. Certainly we'd have to buy the property from either the county or the state, and then we would have to do remediation to make it even available for a possible location. District Road. Now, District Road is not a location that we looked at, but out of respect for the great work that some of you have done in looking at District Road, we wanted to include in our analysis and our scoring criteria. District Road is out by Maine. It's owned by the Jetport, not to get into a lot of technicality around, but the Jetport is part of the city, but it's an independent entity in that the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, helped us purchase the property. So, just a few months ago, or maybe it was a few weeks ago, there was an article in the Portland Press-Herald about our challenges with parking out at the Jetport. A lot of that land out at the District Road right now is currently used as overflow parking for the Jetport. There are other areas in which Mr. McCormick, who I met with a few weeks ago, mentioned in terms of more of a wooded area. But unfortunately, again, this is one of those situations where we are prohibited from moving forward with that piece of property because of the federal funding that went to buy that property. Forest Avenue, Reed Street. This was, I thought, was going to be an excellent opportunity. There was a building that was owned by a private developer that we were seriously looking at. It was a building very near the Pratt Abbott that's there. Unfortunately, the developer that, after I began conversations with, he had donated that property to UNE. and so that was no longer available to us. But it would have been an excellent location. And then finally, the Barron Center location. After we went through all of the entire city, looking at available property, looking at the guidance that we received from the council, looking at the criteria that you see on the left, we felt as though that the Barron Center came out as our recommendation to the city council. And there's a variety of reasons why we think the Barron Center is, based upon the criteria we've been given, is the best location. And those are really the co-location of being able to utilize the Barron Center for the shelter or the services center through food, through other ways in which we can minimize the expense. We obviously own the property, and that was a significant factor in the reason why we selected that. And so that's where we came out with in terms of our recommended location to the city council. I wanted to put this slide up just so you understand and thank all the community partners that we have engaged with. All of these folks that you see on the screen, we've had very good conversations. I will not say that all of them are wildly supportive of our recommendation, because I don't want to misinform you. There's a few who do have some concerns, but the majority of the organizations you see on the screen have been very supportive of what our recommendation is and our efforts to fix our issue with a homeless shelter on Oxford Street. Dawn Stiles, who is the Director of Health and Human Services in the city, she went out and visited the businesses in the Nason's Corner area. Now again, I want to make sure that I'm perfectly clear and honest. Everyone you see up here does not support our efforts to relocate. Several of them do. And so from our standpoint, what we did want to do is go canvass the area and make sure businesses were well aware of what we were proposing to do at the Barron Center. And then finally, just the process going forward. Next Tuesday, September 11th, there will be a meeting of the Health and Human Services where the committee will be able to ask city staff questions, and we'll be able to provide more answers. There will not be public comment at that meeting. And then on September 25th, there will be public comment. No, there will not be public comment on the 25th. There will be a recommendation by the committee and a vote. So that will be on September 25th. And then in October, we will have a council workshop with the full council to make sure that they're fully aware. And then also at the same time in October, the planning board will take up the rezoning of the Barron Center location. And then finally, after all of that is done in October, we will bring the location and the zoning change to the city council in November. There will be a public hearing and vote on the recommended site as well as zoning. So that's the process going forward. And then, Mike, I wanted to turn it back over to you to close it out.
Thank you. All right, shockingly enough, we're a little bit behind schedule, but that's all right. We'll figure it out. So the last few slides here are really comprehensive in the sense that these recommendations would be in place no matter where a service center was located. When we talk about safety and security, to my knowledge, say the last 10 years in command staff positions at the police department, I don't remember a single opportunity other than schools where the city of Portland actually went someplace and built a building from the ground up. Right? In most cases, we go into someplace, retro it out, try to figure it out, knock down some walls, shoehorn ourselves in someplace. This opportunity at the Barron Center allows us to be involved from the very beginning. Before anything is built, we have an opportunity to work around the design with this. There's a concept in law enforcement called CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. And you may have heard this through your neighborhood associations or community policing officers or even security folks that would be at your house that would say, hey, bushes are great and flowers are cool, but you don't want to cover the whole side of your house, or how do I get to my garage if it's dark, if it's dreary? If there's a concern there, then that's probably a problem that you can address just by lighting and surveillance and cameras and all that kind of stuff that we would put into the design aspect of this. Access control is a big deal in the sense that if Rob's trying to put 150 people through the door and get them located in his current shelter, 90% of them are going to be outside as they're kind of working their way through that intake opportunity. When you look at an opportunity design, right, from day one, you can bring those folks inside and out of that, out of the public eye, if you will, up down the sidewalk with 100 people queuing up. It just makes more sense if we have an opportunity to do this from the very beginning. Ownership, pride in the facility. I know from talking to people that run Housing First initiatives that when folks moving into those locations are shown their rooms, as an example, shown those facilities, the pride that they have in those locations go through the roof, right? Because again, these are people that in many cases have lived on the street for years and years and years. So you provide ownership to that location, and I think that helps us with rules and regs and things of that nature. Planning, again, we've learned a great deal from Bayside over the years. Bayside Neighborhood Association has educated us a lot over the years as well. And that's, again, controlling that intake process, clearly stated rules, monitored areas. If you think about the Oxford Street Shelter as I've described it and as Rob has touched on it, the reason that there's so many staff deployed in that building is because you can only see so much. Your sight lines are terrible. You don't have an opportunity to work with the larger volume of the clients that are staying there day to day. So this allows us to monitor that space a lot better when we have, again, let's say all of the dormitory space, all the beds on one floor. It does allow us to do some other things. Security, staffing, and policing. This is a location that would have a community policing center in it, actually inside the building. And when I think about community policing in a setting like that, I draw a comparison to school resource officers. So school resource officers in our schools, now there is an enforcement component of this, which is probably 5% of their overall duties, but they accomplish the mission by problem solving, because they deal with their kids every day. They have relationships with their kids. They know when there's a problem coming. They know when there's an issue at the house. They know when kids are wearing the same clothes for 2 weeks in a row, and we make arrangements to deal with that. Community Policing 101 is problem solving. So we'll build that relationship with the folks that are inside that building day to day so that we can, in fact, provide those kind of services in that same perspective. That good neighbor policy, which I'm going to touch on in a second, but drawing strong rules and regs and guidelines about what we want to see in a new facility, in a new setting. We had a good meeting the staff did with Portland Trails. There was a lot of conversation about green space and concern about people out in the trails. And the conversation we had with them involved park rangers and larger access to those trails. And having more sets of eyes out there in those areas to address some of those concerns. Safety and security, again, Rob touched on the POV out there, and we'll talk about it in different breakout sessions, but when we first got involved with the POV and talked to them, they did a lot of great things that we were happy with. They were truly a 24-hour service facility with meals and laundry and outreach and accessibility. All of those things were great. Since our first contact with them, things have changed to a certain extent with a nonprofit who's running that facility. From a financial perspective, they were forced to curtail some of their day services. So that means after breakfast and after lunch, people were forced to leave the facility for a few hours during the day. And we know what that looks like. That was the model at the Oxford Street Shelter a year ago before it went to 24/7. That's one of the things that we're talking about changing locally, right? So there's all those kind of things that take place. Some of the stuff that happens now is a 24/7 hotline you can call directly into the Oxford Street Shelter to deal with the problem directly. And that's something that would continue. A text-to-tip program as far as contacting. That stuff is in place right now. Contacted the community policing office or the police department directly if need be. The advisory group. Right now, I would say our advisory group is the Bayside Neighborhood Association. And again, they do a great job keeping us in the loop on what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, which is incredibly important that we hear that. But this would give us an opportunity to start an advisory board that would include members of the neighborhood, staff, city staff that would be involved not just at the shelter but at different levels. And all those folks would have an opportunity to meet real time and say, this is what's going on, and this is not working, and we need more of this, so that we can, in fact, be flexible with what we're doing. Data sharing, every week on a Wednesday at 1 o'clock, the police department has a CompStat meeting, a comparative statistics. They look at every crime in the city of Portland. We would be looking from day one to be providing some of that data and working, problem solving with that internal team. And we would do that in whatever neighborhood this ends up landing in, certainly the Barron Center. The Good Neighbor Agreement, this is something that Rob has supplied a policy that's part of the backup material that we put out. There's 11 or 12 pieces of information that went out on the 5th on Wednesday. This is one of those, which means you can't just do bad things in the shelter and cause a problem. If you're causing a neighborhood disturbance of any sort, and we list a few here, that may mean that you're going to lose your services at the service center as well. And that means that that's something that we're very, very concerned about, and something that I think will be effective in this particular scenario. Comprehensive efforts to end homelessness. Again, this is something that I definitely wanted to key on again, because while we're talking about emergency sheltering for that temporary short-term purposes, there are a lot of other things that the city is currently doing and has been doing for a long time. You don't place 257 people in housing in the last year unless you care about that, unless you make that a priority. You don't house 222 long-term stayers since 2015 unless that's something that matters to you. Those things are going to continue. So the Housing First projects that have gone in place, we'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see one in Westbrook. I'd love to see one in South Portland. I'd love to see one in Falmouth. That would be great as well. Housing Trust Fund stuff, there's a lot of conversations around that. Behavioral health services we touched on, housing navigators, specialty shelters. Again, all those things currently exist, and Rob touched on most of those topics. So that's a car salesman speed voice at the last few slides there. But the breakout sessions, again, I'm going to leave them up here so you kind of know where you're going. They're posted on all the different doors. They're posted outside, out front. So now we're about 10 minutes behind as it is. So rather than 5 minutes between each session, why don't we try to be in our rooms and that breakout ready to go in a couple minutes at noontime? And the moderators will see you there. And then we'll do 20 minutes or so. They'll break you out a couple minutes to the next one, break you out, and we'll just keep rolling. Thank you very much.